Hello, hello. So this is a really impromptu, as I do. I'm not much of a planner for those of you that have caught wind of my habits. I know it's more conventional for people to announce their lives and suggest that they're coming up to watch out for them so that you can know in advance, but I will save this so that you can see it as an IGTV after, because I'm sure most of you won't be here to see it live. And despite the fact that there's not going to be many of you, I still feel those little jitters of a live show, which is fun. So I'm here to interview my dad, Daryl Vansier, who is there, and let's just bring him in. This is my first time doing this, so bear with me if there are any technical. There he is.
Hi.
Hi.
This is exciting. This is the first time you've ever interviewed me, or I've ever been interviewed by you.
I know, and it's the first time I've interviewed anyone in the context of this business. I used to do that in my other incarnations, but this is the
Yeah.
first interview.
And also, it's the first time I've done this kind of like Instagram thing. So, is it normal? I'm seeing on my image on the bottom a bunch of writing in front of me. I guess that's normal, right?
Yes, and I can't,
Yeah.
on my side, I don't see the writing in front of your face. So you're well framed. I'm very
Fine.
happy.
It's just well that I don't see myself behind the writing.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Cool.
Um, so yeah, so I mean, there's a million reasons that I want to interview. But first of all, I just want to say thank you for breakfast because I didn't thank you for breakfast.
Hey, you're welcome. It was a pleasure, as always.
We went out for breakfast this morning with my dear friend Teresa. So just to give some context to people, you're in town, you live in Costa Rica most of the year. Hi, Mama. I'm basically here with my parents. That's so funny. And Josiane, thank you for being our third. I'm going to wave to her. So, okay, so my parents are no longer together romantically, but we are all a big friendly family, all in healing work. And this is just an impromptu thing where my dad lives in Costa Rica now. He's in town to wrap up his apartment here. And we've gotten to see each other more in the last couple of days after not having a chance to see each other for a year. But when I was in Costa Rica myself and then COVID hit, I was there for 7 months instead of 2 months. And we lived together for 7 months, which hadn't happened since I was much younger, obviously. And our morning routines merged in a way. And I learned some of the practices that you do in your morning routine, and you looked at some of the ways that I was doing mine, and we kind of incorporated some of the things that we were doing together. And then I formed my course in morning routines when I came back to Montreal. And so now I just thought it was fun to kind of reflect on, you have such a long history with these practices. So maybe you could start by giving a little bit of an introduction on your long and illustrious life.
Wow. um, well, related to the morning practices, um, I was I was in a monastic life for between the ages of 21 and 31 years old. So I had quite a routine, a discipline. So that's probably where my morning practices began. I would wake up early in the morning, and in that context, it was a very structured schedule. So you woke up at a certain time, and then you cleaned up and made it to the Zendo, to the meditation room, started to do your meditation, and then you had your times for breakfast and then for work and exercise and so on. So I had a routine, different routines over the years. And actually what my experience taught me was not to hold on to one routine, because as much as it was a very structured setup, it wasn't a monastic community like some of the more established traditional communities that have been around for a long time and have stuck to their traditions. My teacher liked to kind of pull the rug out from underneath us every now and then and just change it all up. So I
Yeah.
was pretty used to changing it up. And I think that is one thing that I've always tried to find, well, for a long time, I've tried to find that balance in my own daily routine to have a discipline, because if you don't stick to something long enough, you don't really get very much out of it. And yet at the same time, be flexible, because if you stick to it too much, you might be missing the point, missing the essence of what this is all about.
For sure. So just to give context, you were in a Buddhist community, monastery, and in Montreal, right? And you were in the 20s, right, when this was happening?
And beg your pardon, I was what?
20s, right? When in this period that you're talking about, age-wise?
Oh yeah, 20s. Yeah, I just didn't. For some reason you cut off with that word. I was 21 when I joined the community, so yeah, pretty young age. I was there for 11 years, and previous to that, I was exploring. I was living a regular life like everybody else. Went to university, and on the year that I was supposed to graduate, I graduated, but I didn't go to my graduation ceremony. I decided to take off to Western Canada and lived basically what would be called the hippie life in those days, or nowadays as well. And it was a time for me to explore, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I didn't just want to follow the typical route that was designed for me by the structures that were presented to me. So it was during that time that I kind of deepened my spiritual search and eventually discovered meditation. And then came back to Montreal, and one thing led to another, and I found myself joining what was not a monastic community at the time, but it was the Zen Meditation Center in Montreal. It was a Zen community, and never made any decision to stay there for 11 years, but from day to day kept up my commitment and ended up staying there for that amount of time.
Well, I never thought about this before, but it just made me think of those people when they go to the military, and you go from this being this like college kid to suddenly having these sort of strict schedules. There's some parallels in terms of like how you had those daily
Yeah,
structures.
it was definitely kind of a boot camp for me, for sure. I mean, I didn't have actually, I mean, though I'm supposed to be a structured person, I'm a Capricorn, and I'm supposed to like structure. In my own life in school, I wasn't that good at structuring my time in terms of getting my homework done on time. It was always last minute and that kind of thing. So I kind of took to that structure quite willingly, and it served my purposes, because I had at that time a burning desire to become enlightened, as the expression went in those days. Now I probably wouldn't use that language. So it served me to have that discipline. And it was quite, when I was in the community, I didn't perceive it as being perhaps as disciplined or as ascetic as it was. But looking back, or when other people look at it from the outside, it was pretty strict.
Yeah, as a Capricorn, I know you as someone that at least is better at structure than I am as a Pisces. Have flexibility with yourself. And I'm just curious, your teacher, Tyndale, how would he pull the rug out from under you guys when to change up your routines?
Well, he would, we would have everything was built around a kind of an ideology. And so first we were identified with the ideology of a practice that was similar to Japanese Buddhism or Korean Zen Buddhism, and so we had our routines that were focused a lot on meditation practice, in particular, what was called in Japanese Zazen. And we had a work schedule that was called work Zazen. And so it was like taking meditation into action. And we had a practice that was quite isolated for a while, because we were able to do it in the beginning with donations from the public who came for programs, and were sometimes giving instruction by us and meditation by some of us. So that lasted for a while. And then when we needed more money, we had to go out and work. So it wasn't always that that it was an ego test. It was sometimes by necessity that the schedule had to change or activities had to change. And so we'd be sent out to work, work for labor agencies and do all kinds of jobs. So there were circumstances that changed our lifestyle. And then there were also, every now and then, when our teacher was inspired, we could say, to change things up, he would introduce a new practice or a new way of practicing. So when a famous Tibetan teacher by the name of Hellerwork came to visit and we hosted him, then we were influenced by the Tibetan Buddhist traditions. And so we would start to do practices that were associated with that. So there were changes that were partly due to the material circumstances, partly due to my own teacher's evolution in terms of how he was in his own practice and how he was learning to present the practice in a Western context. And then I think there were also perhaps tests, like I was saying, by pulling the rug out. What I mean by that is that, like, if we would get attached to certain roles, for instance, because there was a hierarchy within the community. So some of us we each had our different role within that hierarchy. So if we became attached to a certain role, then that would be taken away. So for instance, when I first moved into the community, for whatever reason, he decided to appoint me to be the kitchen steward, cooking for 40 people.
Wow.
Which I had absolutely no experience of. But I guess he kind of knew that I was really, really kind of, how would you say, I was caught into this whole ideology of macrobiotics, because that's what was the transition between my joining Zen Buddhist philosophy. And so he thought, okay, well, he's into macrobiotics, and let's give this to him, perhaps. He thought that, so he gave me that responsibility, and I was responsible for the menu and telling people what to shop for, and I didn't do all the cooking, but kind of being in charge of that. So then after having that role for a while, then I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I'm sure that was taken away from me, and then I had to adjust to another role. And so there were roles in the hierarchy that we would have for a while, and then you kind of get identified with the role, like all of us do in life. So that was perhaps my first experience of learning that we shouldn't get too identified with our roles, because we kind of lose ourselves in those identifications.
For sure. And before, when I was thinking about what to talk about with you, I thought about how in your life you always resisted the title of guru, because we didn't finish your background, but for decades you have this yoga, meditation, bodywork center called Heaven and Earth Institute in NDG that we lived on top of the institute. And a lot of people tried to gurufy you because they looked up to you as someone that was helping them out in different ways. And you were always very clear to resist that title. Maybe it sort of started there with that training, not to get overly identified.
Yeah, well, also I experienced what it was like to be at the disciple level, of the guru. So I did not want to project that experience on other people. And I also learned from my own experience that it served me, like as a discipline served me, it also served me to be in obedience to a guru. And actually, I won't completely knock the experience, because I think that if you're working on surrendering your conditioning and your ego, there is some value in obedience and not giving yourself the opportunity, or your mind the opportunity, to rationalize, what you should do when somebody suggests such a thing is a good thing to do. So, so I benefited from the obedience.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, it can become like, there's a reason why we have graduation, why schools have graduation, because you're intended to graduate. What serves you for a certain amount of time doesn't serve you at another time. So graduation is important. I think the unfortunate thing that happens in many communities, and I have firsthand experience of it, is that the teachers and the students both knowingly or unknowingly participate or co-participate in a relationship that becomes codependent in the negative sense of codependence, because I do believe in interdependence, but codependence in the sense of the guru just getting misusing the power that the guru has for whatever ways they do. And we've heard of them and I've experienced them. So there's that. And then the student also staying in an infantile relationship with a projection that they've created about their teacher.
Well, it's kind of different too, right? The baby that needs to leave the baby bird that needs to leave the nest, or the sea turtle that needs to get into the ocean by themselves.
Yeah. It's kind of like that commercial on TV. There used to be a commercial about cheese, and and it was promoting cheese in the dairy industry. And there was a 30-something-year-old living at home, and the parents were serving him cheese, and the commercial was saying, "Stop giving him cheese," So it's like, don't encourage the student to stay a student, or don't encourage the child to remain a child when it's time for them to grow up. And so I had experienced how there were benefits, but there were negative aspects to the restrictions that were created by that kind of a relationship, the limitations of that relationship. So I had experienced that in that community. And then I left that community. I told my teacher it was time for me to go, and I won't get into all the details of that now, but after leaving that, I also had to learn some other lessons. I met other teachers, and 2 other prominent teachers, and again had to relearn those lessons. I didn't, once burned, twice shy. I didn't get so involved with those teachers that I did with my first teacher, but I was involved to some degree in that dynamic. And at a certain point, I just realized that the guru serves a person for a certain amount of time, but ultimately the purpose of the guru is to get you to discover your inner guru.
Yeah.
So when I was going back to what you were talking about, my center, my intention in having the center was to share what I knew and do what I like to do as a profession. So in that center, I was teaching yoga, I was teaching meditation, I was doing bodywork, doing some personal consultation work as well. And of course, in those relationships, in therapeutic relationships, in teacher-student relationships, there's always that potential for transference, for the student to want to make a father out of you or a mother out of you if you're a woman, or beyond that, and make a guru out of you.
That's
so,
life. You still can't seem to shake that. People are turning you into they often.
Well, that's my fault.
People.
I'm sure that's my fault. That's probably because I'm a compulsive sharer, and I tend to get into the role of being a mentor. So I'm asking for it to some degree.
Well, your Taurus North Node in the 10th house of the patriarchal figure, it's in your, at least astrologically, it makes sense that your purpose is connected to you being this kind of father figure for people.
Yeah. And it helps me to appreciate that I can have some empathy or understanding for why gurus err and take it too far, because I don't think most of them start out with that intention. I've certainly known several teachers who were truly sincere seekers, like all of us on the spiritual path, and they just got caught in that role. And so I don't want to just say they're evil or judge them on that way, but just that I think that both the teachers and the students need to know what are the risks of that happening.
Yeah, for sure. like in any therapeutic relationship. Yeah, as you
Yeah,
mentioned earlier.
yeah, for sure.
So one thing I'm curious about is when, like in the monastery, in some ways, except for all the jobs that you were doing, you know, for the finances of the community, in some ways you didn't just have a morning routine. You had those kind of practices were throughout the day. I mean, they were like practices that filled your day, or you were doing them at night. So when you come out of this really structured environment, when you left, how was that transition in terms of your daily routine? Like, did you, for a while, did you try to keep up the practices? Did you totally jump ship and go free fall, or did you keep some of them and play around with that? I know it's a long time ago, but
Yeah, maybe a little bit of a combination of all of those things. I I certainly was very conditioned by my experience in the community. So even when I left the community, I didn't just automatically snap my fingers and drop those belief systems, and those included my daily routines. So I certainly kept up meditation regularly, maybe not as much as I would have within the community, but even within the community, we would sometimes, as I mentioned before, we had changes over the years. So for some periods of time, we were meditating 4 or 5 hours a day. Other periods of time, we're only meditating maybe a couple of times a day, and doing other things, other practices, or just very mundane things to support the community. And the idea that I learned within the community was that it wasn't just how much time you sat in meditation that makes your spiritual life or your spiritual practice. It's how you use that as a tool to use throughout your day. So the idea is that you were supposed to carry this awareness and consciousness of what your mind is doing, what thoughts you're having, how you're using your speech, and how you're acting throughout the day. So I tried it even during the time I was in the community. That was a challenge to do, because with all the structures we had, with all the checks and balances, and the ways that we would assist each other to stay in that. That's what monastic life is all about, is helping each other. What Sangha is all about is helping each other to stay on the path.
like
So
when you gave me a look at breakfast after I said something rude about the waitress, and you were like, "Nah, that being snarky about her is," the look just sort of said, "Come on," and I was like, "Yeah, you're right." To be after she
well,
was,
yeah, well, there were extra things there, but anyway, but we had that within the community. There was a consciousness of that, and of course, as you mentioned, it's a good question. What happens when you're all of a sudden like a chicken out of the egg? Now what? Like, whoa, this is a different reality out here. The truth is that we weren't so what's the word, cloistered or insulated in our community that we had no contact with the public. We did go out and work in different industries, and we had some contact, so we weren't completely isolated. But for sure, I I had to make a transition, and a lot of people don't fare very well, from what I've heard, making that transition from what is almost a cult-like existence, or a cult-like existence, and then being out of that whole framework, which includes a whole lot of mental, emotional conditioning, some brainwashing, all kinds of structures that also protect you from experiences that are normal in life. So there are a lot of people who are quite traumatized by that culture shock, that shift. And in my case, I think I'm not sure why, but for some reason it wasn't very traumatic. I just did one thing at a time. I had to figure out how to earn money. So I had to make that transition and figure out how to do that, and be creative with that. And I've always been, I don't know much about astrology, but the North Node must have been calling me before, because I've always had, maybe it's my Capricorn, my sun sign, that always made me a pretty material person too. So I'm fairly grounded in spite of that whole experience. And I like to do practical things. And so I didn't have that much trouble adapting to the so-called real world out here. And as far as my practices, for sure, because I had to take care of my necessities for living more than in a group's context, I had to adapt that. But I kept it up for I've always kept up some form of discipline. But over the years, I learned that I would just want to experiment and just realize that, I would realize that sometimes having to doing everything the same way all the time was kind of stifling. It wasn't keeping me progressing. So I would change it up, or people would influence me in a way that would change it up, and I would introduce new practices. So as you were talking before about your experience with me in Costa Rica for those 7 months, I had some practices before, you had some practices before, and then when we met each other, we influenced each other, and then we're open enough to adapt our routines.
So what does your routine look like today in terms of like those kinds of practices, like a morning routine or wellness, or physical, spiritual wellness?
Yeah, well, for me, the 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 basic thing for me for my day to make my day go well is that I'm well in my body and in my mind. So my days, I always want them to start on the right foot. So the morning routine is really fundamental for me, because I know that when I first wake up in the morning, that's when I set that very moment already begins to determine the rest of the day. There's a ripple effect. People have often asked me, like, when's the best time to meditate? I say, well, first thing in the morning, because it's always a good time to meditate. But first thing in the morning, when you first wake up and the mind starts, calling you to, oh, where am I? What have I got to do? Oh, do I have any appointments today? Then you're get caught up in that dynamic. Where's your day going to go? So I've always told people the first thing in the morning is the most important time to meditate. It's not that there aren't other really important times to meditate as well, but just before you go to sleep is a good time too, because that's going to influence the next 7 or 8 hours, what your mind is doing when you're dreaming, and that's also an influence. So the body and mind, for me, I want to get my clock right at the beginning. So I'd like to start with first breathing, deep breathing exercises, and that's something that was built over many years. I did some very fundamental following of the breath with my meditation practice as a Buddhist. And then when I started practicing more yoga, I practiced the various types of pranayams, the different kinds of breathing exercises. And then in more recent years, I was introduced to the Wim Hof breathing. And I actually, even before that, when I was in Thailand, I was introduced to some hyperventilation techniques for free diving. So
Oh yeah.
I already had some experience of this kind of hyperventilating way of breath work that we do in Wim Hof. I think he doesn't like the term hyperventilation because it sounds like something medical, perhaps, or like a medical condition. But that kind of deep breathing, I had some experience, but I started to incorporate it in my practices recently, in my breathing practice. So I'll start doing that. So now that practice has extended from being 10 minutes to half an hour. So I'll start with that, and that really sets a tone for both my mind and my body, because when you're doing the breath work, I've always said that breath is kind of like the bridge between the body and the mind. So with that, I am waking up my body, I'm animating my body with the energy of my breath, but I'm also focusing my mind on what I'm doing. You've got to be focused to do that. So just doing that, my body is getting the healthful benefits of deep breathing. And then I'm also prepared for the meditation, because just doing that practice, you're in the zone. And then I'll do a meditation for either a half an hour or an hour, depending on what my usual practice these days is. Just a half an hour. Sometimes some friends of mine would like to meditate for an hour, so I'll do it that much. What's that?
Just a half an hour. That's a good amount of time for
Yeah,
breath
it
work.
is. And even on that, I mean, if some days I've woken up too late, or there's an appointment that I have to go to earlier, then I'll adapt and I'll do a 10-minute meditation. Because I also, over the years, I've learned that if I don't meditate one day, it's not that I'm going to go to hell, or everything's going to fall apart. But I also know that the mind can be tricky that way, because you don't notice when you don't meditate, when you skip your morning routine, whatever it is you skip, everything feels pretty normal for a while. You might, maybe some days, if there are circumstances that are stressful, you might react more than if you had been meditating before. But you might not notice how it's changed you not to do them. But your mind can be tricky that way, and you can rationalize away your practice. So I like to say that, you know, I like to think that meditation is something you do like brushing your teeth. You know, you don't sort of think, well, today's a good day for brushing my teeth. Or when you eat, oh, today's a good day to eat. No, today I won't eat. We just eat anyway. We brush our teeth anyway. We go to the bathroom. We take a shower, whatever it is. And I think of meditation that way. So I like to treat it that way. And whether I feel like I need it or not, it's kind of like prayer. You know, a lot of people pray only when they're desperate, when they need help, and any other time they won't pray. So that's one kind of prayer, but that's kind of restrictive, because there's a lot of prayer is a lot more than just asking for something when you need it.
For sure. And it's kind of taking for granted the thing that got you where you are. Like I find I slip from my routine when my routine has benefited me so much that I'm starting to feel really good and my life is really in flow. And I just sort of, I end up just riding on that credit. It's like, oh, I
Right.
feel grown. I don't need these practices. And then I go without them long enough and realize, yeah, that's kind of what was making you feel so good and so connected. And you're neglecting the very thing that got you where you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. I think that we need to be careful not to ride on on the credit, as you say, that we've gotten from doing the practice, nor to get too attached to the practice itself. You know, like just to really be open-minded. I love there's some French philosopher, I don't know which one, that said that every morning he questions everything he believes in, you know.
Yeah.
And I like to approach life that way, with that kind of openness, because I think the point of all this is to be self-aware.
But there's a tension between what you're saying. You're saying on the one hand, you know, you stick to the routine whether you feel like it or not. On the other hand, you're open every morning when you wake up.
Well,
And
that's it. I have to watch what my mind is, whether I'm rationalizing, or whether, you know, what my mind is doing with the experience. And you're not, you know, it's like if you want to learn how to do something like surfing, that comes to my mind. You know, if you're going to wait till you know you can do it without falling, you're going to wait a while. You're not going to learn. So sometimes you got to try things out to find out if they work or not, and to master them. So it's kind of, I think that's part of the challenge is, as you say, holding the balance of tensions, like knowing, being self-aware is not just knowing a part of yourself. It's also, it's being being able to appreciate other parts of yourself. So one part of yourself might say, Daryl, you should be meditating now. Don't rationalize. The other part is saying, wow, you're pretty attached to this meditation, aren't you? You know, why, well, are you going to die without it? Or what's the point of doing that? You know, and just being able to appreciate the value of all the different voices in us.
for sure. Um, Jana, thanks for listening. She said, thank you for sharing your wisdom. Okay, so one thing you didn't mention, One thing you didn't mention that I know is fundamental is the exercise, the working out. Where does that come in your morning routine?
I usually, it depends. I usually want to start, like I said before, with my breathing and meditation, and then the exercise will follow soon after, because I like to exercise when I'm at my maximum energy level, especially at my age. So I don't like to exercise after I've eaten. And if I wait a long time, I'm going to get hungry. So I like, while I'm still riding on the morning energy and the energy that's created by the deep breathing, then that's a great time for me to exercise. However, there are days when sometimes where I want to exercise and the kind of exercise I'm going to do, or who I've made an engagement with to exercise with, will not allow me to get my morning practice done before the exercise. So I'll do the exercise before. So living down in Costa Rica, I live, as you know, near a beach, and sometimes my exercise is running on the beach, and I can't run on the beach if it's high tide. I need to do it when it's low tide. So low tide is at 6 in the morning, but 7:30 in the morning, the water's coming up, and the ground's going to be uneven. It's going to be hard on my joints to run. Then I might adapt my schedule and go for a run first, and then come back and breathe and meditate. Of course,
Yeah.
sometimes things can get tricky, because you come back and then there's some urgencies and you don't get around to doing that. And that's life.
I mean, that's in my class, in my course, the circulate portion, talk about doing some kind of either a breath work or exercise. That's the part that I consider the moving piece. That's the most flexible, because people do like to work out at different times, or sometimes it's a bigger activity, something you're doing for 45 minutes or an hour, and you don't necessarily want to just squeeze it in every single morning before you start your day.
Yeah.
I,
And I
I
think that and that, first of all, different people have um, different constitutions and ways of responding to their day. Like, some people are morning people. I'm a morning person. I've always been a morning person. Some people like to sleep in the morning and stay up late at night. And also, the same person, in my own case, I'll be different depending on which environment I'm in, or which cycle of my life I'm in. So when I'm living in Costa Rica, where it's near the equator, every day the sun rises at the same time and sets at the same time. And it rises at around 5:45, and it sets around 5:45. So it's dark by 6 or 6:15, whereas here it can be dark, at this time of year at around 8 or 9. And so that changes your experience of your day. You tend to stay up later in a northern climate, whereas down there we tend to go to bed earlier and get up earlier. So that'll be one factor, that not only do we have different constitutions or different personal makeups and preferences, but the environment can change our own experience at different times. Will change our routines. So I think that we need to listen to our own bodies and find out what works for us. For me, generally, there is a common thing that I'm more of a morning person, whatever environment I'm in. But I can appreciate the value of exercising in the afternoon sometimes, and I've done it sometimes. Like, if I do yoga in the later afternoon, I'm more flexible than first thing in the morning. And at the same time, if I do exercise at night, especially if it's stimulating, then I may not. I'm already a fairly light sleeper. I may sleep pretty light after that, because I've been energized. So I think we each have to learn to understand how our own body mind works.
for sure. And another thing I want to ask you about is, at the end of my meditation, I have like a woodblock sound that signals to me to get a message from my spirit guides. But you have a really interesting practice where you send and receive energy to people, and you also do a kind of form of prayer, or start just sending people energy, and then you sometimes do self-healing on yourself. I think that'd be interesting for people to hear
Yeah.
what you're doing at the end of.
Yeah, I think that, I'm not sure how that developed. I remember when I was a Buddhist monk, we would have a chant that we would chant. I think it was before we meditated. Yeah, it was before we meditated, and then we'd meditate. And part of the chant was was that we were doing this practice for the sake of all living beings, that we weren't just doing it for ourselves. And then later on in life, I heard about this kind of meditation that in Tibetan is called Tong meditation, which is, or taking and sending meditation. So you're receiving energy and giving energy. And so I usually begin the meditation with the self practice. Most of the time is focused on just being aware of my own body mind through the breath, through constant awareness of the movement of my breath and what I'm experiencing in my body. And then after I've done that for some time, then I feel like I'm a better vehicle for extending blessing or extending the benefits of my practice to others. So I will imagine, I'll start first with my own body. And this is probably just within the last 5 minutes. In that half-hour meditation I was telling you about, I'd meditate for 25 minutes. And then I set my insight timer that you introduced me to make a little chime when there's just 5 minutes left. And in those 5 minutes, I will start to focus first on my own body and think about, each part of my body and think of where does my body perhaps need some healing. So I'll let my breath lead me into that part of the body, receive any kind of energy that is from that part of the body that needs healing. And as I breathe in, I'll imagine I'm taking that energy into my heart and that it's transmuting or transforming in my heart to become purified and detoxified, you might say, and then breathing that back into that area. So I'll do that first in my own body, just focus on different areas of my body and do a kind of a self-healing thing. And that might last maybe a minute or so, and then, or a few minutes. And then I'll start to think of those who I'm closest to, who I care about the most and who I know personally that could use my energy. And they may or may not be ailing, but certainly if they are, I'll consider their situation and do the same thing, bring that energy into my heart and then breathing it back out as if I'm sending energy to extend healing and benefit to that person and or animal in some cases, because I include Blue, your dog. Yeah. And then I'll extend it. So I'll start with those closest to me, and then my circle radiates out. I'll start to think of others that I know personally. And that can get pretty busy after a while because we know a number of people. And then that'll take X amount of time. And then eventually it'll get to the point where first I'm thinking of those close, then those further away. And then I'm thinking about the situation in the world and the dynamics that we're experiencing in the world right now with so much polarity, so much division, so much paranoia and lack of trust and misunderstanding. And I will think about that or visualize that energy going in and coming back out and creating more harmony as well. So
I feel trust yourself as an organism so much to take that in, because basically you're using your heart as a kind of a filter. And I think that, let's say when we feel vulnerable, we don't trust ourselves, we just want to keep energies at bay. It's like we're putting these walls up. Whereas you trust your own process of filtration, your own organism so well that you're actually willing to let that energy pass through you and purify it, as you said it, because you trust that you can kind of transform yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'm lucky that way. I'm not really sure why that is the case, because I've been like that about a lot of things. But there are times in my life when I feel if I'm feeling more vulnerable, just like sometimes you don't want to watch, if you're watching Netflix, you don't want to watch a violent movie because you're not in the mood. You want a light movie or something. So there are times when I'll probably be less likely to do that. But generally, when I'm in that state, I especially trust myself. When I'm in a state of peace and calmness and awareness, then I don't feel a sense of separation so much. I don't really feel a sense of being threatened by anything. So it's easier for me in that state. Whereas if I'm in a more reactive state and less self-aware, then I mean, for instance, if I'm in a conversation with somebody who's very disagreeable and I'm not in the right state to handle that, I might just avoid that.
For sure.
Yeah.
I find I don't do that practice a lot. I wish I did the send and receive, but I've tried it every now and then where I'll start praying, we'll just do quick little prayers for people. And I actually get kind of overwhelmed because, as you said, my mind tangentially just keeps thinking of more and more people that I know. And the names just start rushing to me and like, and them, and them, and them. Like I think it's going maybe too quickly. And sometimes
Yeah.
I'm happy to just put an end to it because it's like, I don't know where to stop sending.
Yeah.
Or
Well, you know a lot of people too. so you might have to figure out ways of like have little groups.
yeah, today I'm going to focus
in a group.
in the Maritimes. Today I'm going to focus on my friends from this period of my life. Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. And if you include the whole world, then, they'll be all in there somewhere. But I mean, I certainly think that we have I believe that we have a shared psyche. We have our own individual psyche, but we are also participating in what I would consider a collective psyche. So I don't think that distance or people knowing that we're praying for them makes much difference. I think that we are one. So I like to remind myself of that, and just use and affirm that in my practice.
Yeah, and it's kind of an active form of practicing compassion within yourself. You're really allowing yourself to feel that in that moment, as opposed to just sort of saying, I'm compassionate, practicing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's true. Like we just doing that practice reminds me to think of somebody, because we were talking earlier at breakfast about how when somebody's not there, out of sight, out of mind, we both share that kind of, we can let go of a person when we're in a situation where they're not there. And sometimes I don't want to do that. Sometimes I want to think of somebody I know who use some support, who's far away.
Agreed. One of the ways that I got thinking about doing this live with you is that you mentioned you were doing Tibetan rites in the morning now. And the title of my course is like, I adapted it. It used to be create your own morning routine, or I switched it to co-create, because I like this idea that even if we stick to a set of practices in the morning, that we have some kind of routine or ritual, that we continue to evolve and modify our routines at different points in our life based on the influences that come into our life or different things we feel called to or need. And so you used to do morning pages quite religiously. That was something that I kind of shared with you, that my mom had shared with me. And now,
Yeah,
and then
I forgot to mention it, that I still do that, but not as often. So that's probably why I forgot to mention it. I did it this morning, but I don't always manage to do it every day. It seems to be on the hierarchy of my things to do. It seems to be meditation and breathing tend to be more priority for me. But certainly when you were there, you were supporting me in that, and for a long time afterwards, I was doing that even before my breathing and meditation, because as we both know, that the idea is to coming out of the dream consciousness mind, where you're in touch with your unconscious, is a great time to start writing. Because if we wait too long, then the editor of our waking mind will limit what we can write that is revealing some subliminal or subconscious things that we can benefit from being aware of.
for sure. And I don't know how much we might get cut off in 10 minutes or so when we reach the hour maximum of the IG live, but I do want to talk about the dream interpretation technique that you taught me. And I know in my course I put them both in the expression component because either people can do the morning page or they do dream analysis, but you kind of let the two practices bleed into each other, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
you're interpreting your dreams while you're writing the automatic
Well,
write.
I, if I have a dream that I don't want to, because with dreams also you got to write them down as soon as you wake up. So you've got two things: you got morning pages, and you got the dream. You got to write down. So what are you going to do? Well, combine them. Why not? You know, that comes up. But like for instance, this morning there was no, though I did have dreams, I didn't remember them, and not in any significant way. So I didn't write about my dreams on my morning pages. But um, at times I've done it, and I know that that's not strictly the purpose of morning pages, and that morning pages is a kind of a free flow without intention behind it of creating anything or getting something out of it per se. And
Exactly.
so I know that that's kind of a departure, but I've permitted myself to do that. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know.
Yeah. And so can you just introduce a little bit the dream interpretation technique in light of voice dialogue?
Yeah. Well, we didn't talk about voice dialogue yet, but I did talk about how there were different selves. You know, how we can.
Yeah.
I want to sometimes listen to one part of myself and another part of myself, and voice dialogue has to do with viewing ourselves as a complex of identities. Like when we talk about having an ego, we don't really just have one ego. The ego is kind of like a conglomeration of many. There are many selves within us, and and they're all meant to serve us. But if we get identified with some of them at the exclusion of others, we can be limited in our capacity to manage our own lives or to respond to others in appropriate ways. Because if we want to have understanding, we need to understand where somebody else is coming from. So if we want to be able to understand it, we have to know what that persona is all about. And the way we can know it best is by discovering it or uncovering it within our own ego, our own self complex. So voice dialogue is a lot about this theory of subpersonalities. And in terms of the dream work, the way I work with dreams, I mean, I'm not an expert in dreams, but there are many different ways of doing it. But what I do is I just write down what I dreamed, whatever I remember that I dreamed, because I always tell people it's not important that you remember it all. Just whatever you remember, and even the order of it. The story is not the important thing.
Yeah.
So I just write down what I remember, and then I break it down. So when we talk about analyzing our dreams, analyzing means break things down into its parts. So dreams have people in them, they have things in them, and there are emotions and feelings in dreams. And so I'll write down on one side of my page a list of the people that were in my dream, the things that were in my dream, and I'll include also like places or contexts, you know, as well. And then on the other side of the page, I'll write down what, if I'm writing it, I do this in my mind now a lot, but at first I started doing it on paper. I'll write down what each of those people or things, what are two or three qualities that they have, so that I'm looking at it in terms of not just what the story is saying in my dream or who the people are, because the people might be people that we know very well, and we might think it's about them, but it's not necessarily about them, because the way I see it, dreams can sometimes be about can be revealing something that happened to you the day before, or a memory of that, or even predicting what's going to happen the next day. But that doesn't take away the reality that dreams are the way that your unconscious comes to your awareness. Because during our waking hours, our editor is always there editing out all that information, and we just think and speak and act in ways that are kind of filtered through that mask or that filter. So with dreams, it's important to recognize that whatever these people or things are, they're just symbols of parts of yourself. So I'll write down the qualities of each of those symbols, even if they're people that I know. It was not necessarily about them, but then it's about that part of me. Let's say one of those people is an army sergeant, okay? And it's not necessarily somebody I know, but what does that represent to me? So then, let's say it represents somebody who is authoritative and kind of militant. Then I'll say that the authoritative militant part of me was doing the dream. So I'll use that kind of structure and then tell the story, write the story out in terms of the energetics that are happening within me, rather than just in terms of the story, the literal story of the dream, the energetics of those symbols. Because I believe that the symbols, the universe, whatever we want to call it, the universe, or the unconscious, the big consciousness, what's beneath the surface is so incredibly wise and all-seeing. And the symbols that it presents to us are just brilliant. So if we have, each of us are the ones who know our symbols the best. Whatever the symbols mean to you is more accurate than what you will read in a book. You know, not that you can't benefit from some of the literature out there about dream symbols, but you know best. What your symbols are, your symbols. They're presented to you. So I will use those symbols to understand a bit what the dream is trying to tell me. And I believe that dreams are showing us where we're at, where we're not necessarily fully conscious or apprehending what clues we're getting from life.
So once, like, talking about the tangible benefits of doing that kind of work, once you've interpreted a dream and you rewrote it in terms of the energetics and what those people, places, and things represent to you, is there a kind of synthesis where you integrate this insight and then you carry that insight into your day, or it informs your behavior?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, just like any of us can do this, if we interpret our dreams and we see that, okay, this is showing me that lately I have been viewing a situation a particular way, and that now I'm starting to discover that I have another option. The dream is making me aware that there's another part of me that would like to be involved, perhaps, in what I'm doing that I can benefit from. So I might adapt my behavior, or it might not even be a specific thing that I do. I might just change my way of viewing a situation. I might just have a different attitude towards something that's going on in a relationship or in my work or whatever. So that'll be one thing that we can all do. The other thing that I do is, we won't have time to get into it in this conversation, but I apply that, what I've learned from the dream, I bring that into a voice dialogue context, which is a technique where you can actually give voice to those different parts of the dream and have them interact with the facilitator. So that's another method as well.
Yeah. So you would take these recurring personas that show up in dreams, and you would take that into the therapeutic context of a voice dialogue session and have them.
Yeah, that's one way. I mean, if you're lucky enough that you can find somebody to facilitate you in voice dialogue, then you can have them facilitate you in those different personas. Like, I could take the seat of the army sergeant and see what the army sergeant has to say, and I won't know before I take that seat what he's going to say, and I can get an even more profound understanding of what the dream was about by taking that into this conscious technique called voice dialogue. And then if you don't have access to a voice dialogue facilitator, if you've had enough experience with the voice dialogue that you've been facilitated enough that you know how it works, then you can do it with yourself. I've done that many times. I just take the position of facilitating myself. I'll literally change seats in the room. It's kind of like a musical chairs game, and take different roles and kind of have a dialogue with different parts of me. But each time I shift seats, I shift roles. So there are different techniques. You can also do it through journaling. You can use your left and your right hand. You can have one voice speak with the left hand, the other voice speak with the right hand.
Wow. Yeah. And I don't know why I keep coming back to this, but I'm thinking of the Socratic Dialogue. I think they call it dialectic, where they start out with one argument or a hypothesis, and then the other person is a counter argument, and they dialogue back and forth, and then they aspire to some kind of synthesis at the end or a new conclusion. And so when you're finishing that process of voice dialogue, let's say working from something that came up in dreams, let's say you're journaling it, for example, do you arrive at some kind of synthesis at the end that you're integrating those different?
Sometimes, yeah. I mean, I think that it's not always, I don't know if we ever quite get there. I don't think we ever quite arrive. I think it's always a process. And voice dialogue, when the central position, we give that a name, aware ego, which sounds like a contradiction because usually ego has a bad rap and it means anything else but being aware. But aware ego is like where your feet are still on the ground, if not wallowing in the mud, and yet you're also aware. So you're feeling and experiencing different parts of yourself. You're not outside of it. Like, it's different than the awareness of meditation, where you're kind of aware in the sense of away, withdrawn from it and observing it. You're not a detached observer. You're in it. You're right in the middle of it. So that position of the aware ego is what I'm striving to cultivate in my life, and that is not a position. It's actually a process. Like when you take a role, that's a position. But the whole purpose of the work is not just to solve problems or to get there, to arrive. Just like meditation, you don't get anywhere meditating. You just keep practicing. That's the practice is the goal. So it's similar with this kind of work as well. I'm not really always going to have a solution or get there, but it will increase my awareness, hopefully. And so it's the process that's being cultivated. So I don't always get like a big aha moment.
Well, I think maybe the integration is through the process of your unconscious and conscious mind coming to terms with one another, and it's getting incorporated that way. Like, yeah. It's your unconscious is integrating those insights, and then that fuels and influences your behavior out in the world.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, for sure. I think that the being first of all, being aware that we are ultimately, our essence is a process. It's not anything that has any lasting. Nothing lasts. It's temporary. So it's a process. You know, it's changing all the time. So let's face it, we are a process. So if we're a process, then if we have that awareness, that's going to help us in our life. Because if we have strong positions in life, in martial arts, we learn that a strong position is not a good thing, because you're an easy pushover if you're stuck. So you don't want to be stuck in any position.
You got to wiggle out of things.
Yeah, got to go with the flow.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. So many interesting things. We could go on forever, as we do.
Yeah.
It's been just as fun as I was hoping it would be.
Good. This is my first Instagram video experience. I'm now an initiate.
I foresee many podcasts in your future. Especially though, which, if you want to make a brief mention of that before we finish up. Well,
first of all, I'm seeing Salvatore. Hello, Sam. I'm seeing him on the feed, and it's so cool to see these people are watching that. And Mathieu Moody, bonjour. Odile aussi, bonjour. I just think it's so cool. I wasn't paying attention before. I was all just wrapped up in what I was talking about, and you.
I No, and we have someone else that's also watching
Oh, yeah.
our
Nathalie.
live.
Ooh. Oh,
Yeah.
and is Blue there?
Yes, she's there.
There she is. She's not even interested.
She's interested. She's just
She's
resting.
just playing hard to get as usual.
So you're writing a book.
Yeah. Do we still have time to talk?
Well, it's gonna end soon, but just quickly, it's about your experiences and
Yeah.
things.
Well, the book, speaking about talk, it's called Walk the Talk. And it's a book that I've been thinking about writing for a long time. And I only started writing when you came to visit, I think, in Costa Rica. And I'm about 2/3 of the way through. So my goal is to get it written by December or January. So it's a book that basically, I mean, I'm compulsively sharing what I do and what I believe in anyway all the time. So I figured I might as well write a book about it. So that's what it is. It's really describing a lot of the stuff we're talking about.
And that you do in lifestyle counseling.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so anyway, if people want to find you, you have a website that I help you make.
Right.
You do offer.
The website is under my name, right? DarylVansier.com, right? And it's also got, I think, the subtitle Walk the Talk or something, or it's talks about my.
Yeah, talk. And you do offer on occasion lifestyle counseling with people still in voice
I do.
dialogue.
I'm no longer teaching regular classes in meditation or yoga or doing regular bodywork sessions, but my intention is that once the book is out, that I might start doing workshops in aspects of the different disciplines that I share in the book. And in the meantime, I am also doing lifestyle counseling, as you know, once in a while.
Well, I'm happy to be your warm up for when your book is out and you're on a book
Thank
tour
you.
podcast.
Yeah, you're a great warm up, Natalie.
Thank you. And as always, my course on morning routines is on sale for 25% off until September 15th.
Right.
On that, if you want to develop your own,
All
that's
right.
for an
Cool.
hour.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Well, see you very soon.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's,
What do I do here?
I don't know. I'm going to end it. I'm going to end it somehow.
Okay.
Okay.